Premchand's relationship with cinema proved very stormy and traumatic. My today's presentation looks into why did a literature of Premchand's stature dabble with films, and secondly, how far did Indian cinema draw from him? By the early 1930s, cinema all over the world was making a switch over from silent era to sound. The first Indian talkie, Alam Ara, was released in 1931. By this time, Premchand was already a literary icon. Barring Godan, most of his classic stories and defining novels had appeared. Cinema created conflict in Premchand. Although he loathed the lack of depth and literary sensitivity of the growing popular cinema, he was aware of its potential as a medium and believed if pursued aesthetically and ideologically, it could become a vehicle for social change. He was inspired by certain literary people like Pandit Sudarshan, who were already working in films. The arrival of sound in India had sidelined the silent era legend Dadasaheb Phalke, but a new generation of socially committed filmmakers like P.C. Barua, V. Shantaram and Devki Bose were emerging. The British censors felt many of these films were covertly arousing nationalism. Interestingly, censors were liberal with kissing and exposure, with the result cinema was going whole hog into sex and cheap thrills. As a socially committed writer, Premchand dreaded this, and therefore his dilemma was whether to join or not to join. But financial pressures were growing. Premchand was finding it difficult to sustain his journals like Hans and Jagran. It was at this juncture in 1934 that Ajanta Cinetone Company of Bombay gave him a dignified offer of paying 8,000 rupees per annum for writing 6 stories for films. Premchand wrote a powerful story, Mazdoor, which was to be directed by M. Bhavnani. The film was jinxed from the very outset. Several changes proved so humiliating that Premchand thought the story completely lost his stamp. He also did a small role of a village pradhan in the film. The worst was yet not over. Now the censors had a go at it, with more changes. The name was changed from Mazdoor to Mil Mazdoor. Eventually, the British government banned the film for 2 years. Enough was enough. Disillusioned, Premchand decided to return to his roots. After expenses, the money he brought from Bombay barely sufficed to clear even the debts of Hans and Jagran. Back to his forte, Premchand created timeless stories like Kafan and a landmark novel, Godan. It was ironical that the first classic based on Premchand's novel appeared in Tamil cinema. The filmmaker who visualized it was Subramaniam. Achieving a legendary status, the budding singer M.S. Subbulakshmi made her debut in this film. The film proved a turning point in the history of Tamil cinema. But surprisingly, from the late 1930s up until Satyajit Ray's Shatranj Ke Khiladi and Mrinal Sen's Oka Ori Katha in 1977, none of the Hindi films based on Premchand's work were breakthroughs. There were Mil Mazdoor, Seva Sadan, Mazdoor by Nitin Bose in 45, Hira Moti in 59, Sautela Bhai, Godan, Gaban, Shatranj Ke Khiladi by Ray, Oka Ori Katha, Mrinal Sen, Sadgati by Satyajit Ray, which was a telefilm, and Tahrir, a tele-serial of a story which was done by Gulzar, which is in 2004. Krishna Chopra's Hira Moti was based on Premchand's Do Bailon Ki Katha. Starring Balraj Sahni and Nirupa Roy, it was packaged with music of Roshan and lyrics of Shailendra. The film was a reasonable success. In the 1960s, Krishna Chopra again made Gaban, based on Premchand's acclaimed novel of the same name with Sunil Dutt and Sadhana. The film lacked any credibility and is today remembered more for a popular Mohammad Rafi number penned by Hasrat Jaipuri, Ehsaan mere dil pe tumhara hai dosto, ye dil tumhare pyar ka mara hai dosto. Trilok Jetli's Godan in 1963 was a sincere effort, but in spite of Pandit Ravi Shankar's music, the film failed to cut any ice. The only Indian film which remains a reference point is Satyajit Ray's Shatranj Ki Khiladi. Made in 1977, the film attracted international attention. Ray came to London to sign Richard Attenborough and Saeed Jaffrey. What is significant about Ray's film is that it documents quite credibly the conflict between Wajid Ali Shah and East India Company, not merely as a backdrop or a subtext, but as a focus of the screenplay which runs parallel to the main plot. This was certainly a departure from Premchand's story. Ray creates the Awadh milieu with a documentary perfection, and the beginning follows Premchand's brief almost entirely. The film recreates Lucknow of that period, but the treatment looks studied and avant-garde. With no offense to Ray's stature, it can be argued that the film lacks the effortlessness and spontaneity of his early period films like Charulata. On the contrary, Premchand's Shatranj Ki Khiladi moves effortlessly. Once you start, it grips you. Although both the film and the story juxtapose and intersperse the narration with history and social and political milieu, there are segments where the film becomes heavy, which doesn't happen with the story. For example, the sequences of General Utram are too lengthy and distracting. There is no doubt that the sterling performances of both Sanjeev Kumar and Saeed Jafri lift the film. The voice of Amitabh Bachchan as a narrator is another plus point. Ray also alters the end. He does create a stunning climax, which is different from the story. Films based on literary works and history have always aroused controversies. When Shekhar Kapoor was questioned about the historicity of Elizabeth, he replied that all history was interpretation. The same can be said about films. Sanjay Leela Bhansali's Devdas was loved by many, while others found it jarring and opulent. When the novelist R.K. Narayan was informed about the changes in Vijay Anand's Guide, which was based on his English novel of the same name, he was furious. Vijay Anand, in a recorded interview, told me that after a specially arranged screening of Guide, R.K. Narayan came and hugged him and said he was proud of the film. Dadasaheb Phalke Award winner and at present India's filmmaker of the highest stature, Mrinal Sen, who adapted Premchand's Kafan in a Telugu film called Oka Ori Katha, feels that a feature film cannot be a carbon copy of the literary work. He writes in his latest book, Montage, that cinema must cultivate an attitude of reconciliation to literature and not of competition. In his interpretation of Kafan, Mrinal Sen went to the extent of even changing some of the character traits of Ghisu, Madhav's alcoholic father. Mrinal's justification was that he placed the story at a different time and region, but he stressed that the spirit of Premchand's Kafan was intact. I quote Mrinal Sen from his book Montage, describing his meeting with Premchand's son, Amrit Rai, after the screening of Oka Ori Katha. Quote, Premchand's son, the widely renowned Amrit Rai, watched the film. I went up to meet him as he emerged after the screening. He said, "It is a shattering experience and a shattering film, although I do not agree at all with your interpretation." I had of course anticipated this difference of opinion, so I spoke up with certain amount of courage and said to him, I cannot be absolutely sure that had your father been alive today, his reaction would have been any different from yours. But tell me, at this particular moment, are you regretting the fact that you let me make another film based on this story? Amrit almost shouted his response to me. Not at all. Why don't you tell me when you will be using another story for another movie? I was greatly reassured. Unquote. It is surprising that unlike regional filmmakers Subramanyam, Mrinal Sen and Satyajit Ray, it never occurred to the discerning filmmakers of the mainstream Hindi cinema to make a sincere film on Premchand classic. I would like to end by wondering how can we turn a Premchand literary classic into a film classic. The answer might be we need a filmmaker who has the sensitivity of Satyajit Ray, the historical perspective of Shyam Benegal, the sincerity of Bimal Roy, the literary flair of Gulzar, and finally the pain and emotional depth of both Ritwik Ghatak and Gurudutt. That is a tall order. But who knows, it might happen one day. Thank you.